What's up, guys? Welcome to Knockers on the Bottom. I'm your host, Jay Mill. Jay Miller, if you like. So let's get into it. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Once we get to 100, we will give something away. So just make sure you keep hitting that, and then we'll eventually get there. So today we have a preseason game, Baltimore Ravens, Dallas Cowboys. Looks like it's going to be a little less than what we got last week as far as people sitting out. Which will be pretty good. I still don't expect to see, let's say, Dak Prescott, Pickens, Lamb, still probably not Jadon Blue, Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders. All those guys are probably all out, as well as Tyler Guyton, probably also Tyler Smith, Terrence Steele. These are all, at least on offense, the guys we're not going to see. I do expect us to see some of Sam Williams this week. Maybe not a lot. I know some people were surprised that he didn't play last week, but he did tear his ACL a year ago around this time. So the Cowboys are, they were still kind of ramping him up. They were letting him practice because practice environments are more controlled. So they can control the outcome, they can control the scenario, they can control how hard the player goes and what the other players do. When it comes to preseason games, all those control factors are out the window, right? Because people can hit you, people can, block you. A person can take while you're engaged and chop block you. And yes, that's a penalty, but they can still do it, right? They just get a flag thrown on them. And then after they throw that flag, let's see if Sam Williams gets up and he's good to go. So linemen are falling around your feet. Nobody really has to stay on their feet. Just all those different factors. So I understood why the Cowboys kept him out last week, even though some people freaked out. But I also understand why they might want to play him a little bit this week to, kind of get him up to game speed, get him some reps, and kind of see how his knee and he responds to that. I don't know if we'll see Osa Odighizuwa. We may or may not. I don't know if we'll see Malik Hooker. Just some of those players. Donovan Wilson. They'll probably keep all those guys out. Deron Bland. I don't expect to see him. Kyer Elam. I don't expect to see him. As far as defense goes. But I think everybody else is pretty much on the docket. So what did I name there? 12 to 14 players. And I included some of the injured players, not all the injured players. Of course, Overshown's not playing, and of course, Trayvon Diggs not playing, but I do hope to see John Stevens Jr. this week. I don't think we got to see him last week. We got to see more of Fairweather. We got to see a little bit of Schoonmaker. I'd like to see John Stevens work in this week. I'd like to see more of Jalen Tolbert a little bit early. I know last week we got to see him a little bit later. I'd like to see him a little bit earlier, but that might be depending on how Shoddy wants to call it, because he might want to get a look at some of the young receivers earlier and then kind of slide in some other mix and matches later. Coaches like to kind of change things up during the preseason. But the number one thing I'm looking for is I'd like to see how Joe Melton bounces back in this game. The first game he was out there, he was rifling balls all over the field. He was, overthrowing receivers left and right. And once he settled down, he was okay, but he's still missing on quite a few throws. I want to see how film week went this week and how him having another week to prepare for another game, not necessarily being as hyped up as he was, and just kind of showing a little bit of touch on some of these passes and see if that helps him. It doesn't matter if, let's say, he shows proper touch on a pass that a receiver is running wide open and the receiver drops it. That's cool, man. It's not necessarily about the result, but about the process, right? So the first thing in the process that we want to look for is that he has corrected some of the mistakes that he's made from last week to this week, right? Not making the same mistakes all over again. And then also the result in the process that we're looking for is him going through his progressions and making sure that he gets the ball out in a timely fashion to the correct receiver. There were too many times last week, and I know we went over some of this, but there was too many times last week where the receiver was open and Joe kind of held the ball for a tick too long and then tried to rifle it in there. But in the NFL, everybody's fast, so it's not going to work like that. Even with a cannon for an arm, being on time is still the best way to come up with consistent completions. Doesn't mean it's the only way, but it's still the best way. It's the best way to be more consistent. It's the best way to do all the little things that you want your backup quarterback to do when he is your backup, right? You want him to just come in and keep the offense on schedule. He doesn't have to be spectacular, but there was a lot of times last week where Joe was trying to be spectacular. Another thing I'm looking for, I can't wait to see Tyler Booker in this game. I know it's preseason. I know he's probably going to be one of the only young guys playing. I do expect Cooper Beebe to get some snaps as well, since he's only in his second year. So, you're going to have those two inside, and then you're going to have like a mash unit to fill out the rest. But I'm really looking forward to seeing Tyler Booker against those Ravens defensive tackles. I want to see what kind of leverage he plays with, what kind of power he plays with. Is he able to hold up at the point of attack in the run game? Is he also able to set and keep the middle of the pocket clean in the passing game? The Cowboys did a really good job of that last week, and I want to see how Booker does it, especially with some guys that he might not necessarily be playing with at the start of the season, because as we know, we saw it last year, injuries hit, and people are going to be mixed and matched all over the place. The plan that you have is going out the window as soon as you get punched in the mouth. So I want to see how he plays with some of these other guys too, because you never know, at some point during the season, the offensive line might become a mash unit and might have to play with several different players and kind of keep the train moving. So I'm looking forward to see how Tyler Booker and Cooper Beebe do along the offensive line. Also, to round out the offense, another person I'm really looking forward to seeing is Phil Maffa. I thought he had a pretty good game last week. One of his runs was negated by an Awesome Richard penalty when he lined up too deep in the backfield and got called for that penalty, and then got called again for it the very next play. And Maffa had like a 15 to 16 yard run into the red zone during that play, and he was, showing some decent burst, but also showing some good pad level and running behind his pads and kind of making guys feel him in the run game. So I hope he gets a little bit more snaps a little bit earlier. I know Deuce came out last week and he started that game next to Joe Milton. I understand why that happened. Deuce had missed a few weeks of training camp, and the Cowboys were thin at the running back position, and this was kind of Deuce's chance to get basically practice reps, right? Because these games, preseason games, that's all it is. It's just a glorified practice. That's it. You're practicing playing football, but you're practicing it in an uncontrolled game setting, right? With a clock and the penalties and special teams plays. It's in live hitting, so it's a little bit more gusto than a normal practice, but still, it's pretty much a glorified practice. So I understand why Deuce got those reps. I would like to see some more reps early for Phil Maffa, especially with Booker and Beebe in there, because if those guys are moving guys off the ball, and then Maffa can, hit the hole pretty hard and still run behind his pads, and hopefully we're not having a bunch of penalties, so we can, even though we knew that play was a good play because Awesome Richards, all he did was line up a little bit further back. That doesn't negate the hole created by the offensive line. That doesn't negate Phil Maffa running behind his pads, because the referee didn't blow the whistle until the play was over. He threw the flag, let the play go, then blew the whistle, and then called the penalty. So the play happened as is. So we got a nice full evaluation of that. It just would be nice to see Phil Maffa rewarded with that play not being a penalty and getting to feel the momentum of that game and then kind of go a little bit forward there. So he's the guy out of the running back group that I'm hoping to see in the game today. On the defensive side, looking forward to see Donovan Ezeraku. Again, they might have a certain plan for him with how he rushes, or they might let him open up a little bit more. Depends on what they want him to work on. I know they don't want the defense to really show too much. So look for it again to be a very vanilla defensive game plan, and you might just get a bunch of bull rushes from Ezeraku, or maybe a little bit of speed to power, maybe a little bull rush to start to get the tackle off balance, and then maybe a little shoulder dip and rip move. But you don't want to show too much. You don't want to show too much hand fighting. You don't want to show too much technique moves. You don't want to be out there spinning and swimming and ripping and dipping. You don't want to do all that, and then everybody knows that's what's in your bag of tricks. But I do look forward to seeing how he plays. I look forward to seeing Sam Williams. I look forward to seeing JT. I think he got a little tired last week later in the game. I would like to see how he comes back with that this game, and how he plays as far as technique and stuff like that. He was very active last week. Even when they were blocking him, you could see him like spinning to try to get off the block, and fighting with his hands to get off the block, and kind of trying to dip a little bit. He's a big guy, but he was active at least. He was very, very active. So I want to continue to see him be active, even if he's not playing with the best pad level at the moment. Hey, at least you're being active. Play down the line of scrimmage. If the ball's going a couple of gaps away from you, how do you play down that gap and try to, get to that tackle without giving up your integrity, right? Also, one of the guys I'm looking to see as well is Shamar James. I got to see a lot of great things from Maris Leofau last week as a linebacker. He was flying around. He was hitting. He was playing pretty well. Looked to be in regular season form already. I would like to see Shamar James because he's a rookie, and I would like to see him paired with the other rookie. So JT in front of him at defensive tackle, and then let Shamar James sit in there and play that weak side linebacker and see how those two play off each other. See if one doing their job helps the other, or see if one is able to cover up from the other. Let them get a feel for playing together. It's all about building that chemistry right now. So I would like to see those guys play because just as much as you talk about your offensive line and your running back building chemistry, in actuality, it pretty much mirrors the same way on the other side of the ball. You want your defensive line and your linebackers to build a little chemistry as well, too. In a different way that your linebackers attack the gaps, them consistently knowing where you are so that they know where they're supposed to be. Because if you're all over the place as a defensive tackle, you're pretty much getting your linebackers killed because they don't know their gap. They know their, they might know their gap responsibility, but when you're out of that gap and now they have to cover a different gap, that's going to be a problem. So I'd like to see those two work in concert a little bit with each other. And that goes the same for all the linebackers, but I'm looking specifically at the rookies, the new guys, because these are the guys that the Cowboys are probably going to have on the roster. They're probably going to make the 53. And at some point this season, those guys are going to have to play. And then also I'm looking to see the slot corner battle the most. I know we saw Izzy McQuamo with the nice interception last week. He played some inside, some outside. We saw Keemon Hall also get some snaps in there. He was giving up some plays. And then we've seen Childress come on, the last week or so of practice here, and he's kind of been getting the reps with the ones in the slot. So I want to see if he can carry that over to the preseason game to see how he plays in that role when the lights come on. We've seen Cowboys players all the time, are great in camp against their own guys, and then when they get into these games, all of a sudden it's completely different. I'm looking at Cropper, for sure. Cropper is one of those players that's an example of that. Also, Deuce Vaughn seems to show up a lot in these preseason games, and then all of a sudden when we get to the season, he's not able to play anymore. He's done. He's inactive because he doesn't do enough things on game day. So it's really going to be nice to evaluate Childress to see if he can carry this over to that and then carry it over to another week of practice and then carry it over to the final preseason game because that's how he's going to make the roster. So those are the guys I'm looking for. No scores, no predictions in that area. It's a preseason game. Like I said last week, it could be 45-20, and I could get exactly what I need to see out of everybody involved and not be necessarily care about the result. It's not about the result in the preseason. It's about the process. So, for you guys that are football fans and for you guys that are trying to educate yourself in the game and watch the game more quickly, don't be concerned about the final score. Be concerned about each individual player and how they look, and then try to visualize it, right, as part of the puzzle. So if you see JT and Shamar working good on their side of the field together, right, but it doesn't matter because the ball goes the other way, even though JT held up and, Shamar was in his proper gap, the ball goes the opposite way, running back gets 20 yards and a touchdown. What you're looking for there is, okay, when that is JT, but he's next to Osa, and that's Shamar, but he's next to Leofau, or he's next to Sanborn, and then you have Micah on the outside, you have Dante Fowler on the outside. Now, when they're doing those things, but you have better players covering up their spot and doing their job properly, now that's a no gain. Or now, when a running back turns back the other way because he doesn't want to go towards Osa's side and Micah blasts through the line and he doesn't want to get killed, he's cutting it back towards JT, but JT's holding that gap and Shamar is filling that lane. Those are the reasons why you don't take everything into account during the preseason, because you have one piece of a puzzle that's not even put together yet out there with other pieces that are not going to be out there, right? If the Cowboys are playing all of their starters on offense and defense and they came out and they looked horrible, I would say Still, it probably wouldn't be much you could gain from that, but you would gain a little bit more from that. The intensity isn't necessarily the same as game day. Everybody's not fully as far as installing offense, installing defense. And then on top of that, there's not really much game planning involved. You're not looking at this guy and saying, I know his specific weakness, and I'm going to game plan and strategize to accentuate that weakness for my side of the ball this week. That's what coaches look at throughout the entire week. This is why a lot of times when people say, hey, you can't garner much from the preseason, that's why. Everybody in the NFL is great, and there's these small little things that you take advantage of, right? We know that just to give you a little bit more insight into that, when Micah first burst onto the scene, he was a get up the field and get the quarterback guy, and the Eagles would take advantage of him with that read option and make him make a decision to go to the quarterback or go to the running back, and they will put him in space. And the Cowboys defense didn't have any counters to adjust because they would just let Micah operate in space because that's what he was good at when it came to getting the quarterback. But when you give him a choice and he's operating in space, he can, no matter what, he's going to make the wrong decision. Because if I go for the quarterback hands it off. If I go for the running back, then the quarterback keeps it. So it's just those types of things where, you're game planning specific things to take advantage of even a great player's small weakness. You don't see that in the preseason, so don't look for that tonight. Look for those individual matchups. Look for the process and have fun. It's football. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hit me up on Twitter at jmillerIYL. You can also hit me up, knockersonthebottom@outlook.com, knockersonthebottom@gmail.com. Leave comments below. Anything you want me to cover, any questions you might have, anything you just want to say, comment below. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Love you guys. Until next time, I'll be here after the game. I'm your host, J Miller if you like. This has been Knockers on the Bottom. Peace.